to look at the Baal Haturim, because I find his comments just always inspiring as well. The Baal Haturim was himself a great lawyer in the Jewish tradition. He was the one, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, he is the one who made a code, probably the most influential code, the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch. It's called the Tur. That's why he's called the Baal Haturim, the author of the Tur. The Tur is the row, and there were 4 rows on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, and so he divided all of Jewish law into 4 areas. He was the first one to do that. Prior to him, the most influential code was Maimonides. Maimonides divided Jewish law into 14 volumes, but it made it incredibly challenging to find anything because it wasn't necessarily organized intuitively. But the Tur divided everything into 4 volumes. And as he divided all areas of Jewish law into 4 areas, he systematically divided it. And it was his division that was the most effective and won the day. Nobody really copied Maimonides' division, but the Tur's division basically has been the ruling division from the time he did it until the present day. And so what are the 4 areas of Jewish law? It's a little bit of a tangent, but the 4 areas of Jewish law are Orach Chaim, which is the daily life. And that's also intuitive. He just follows you through the day and then through the Shabbat and the holidays. So if you want to know, what do I do when I pray? Well, then you look at the early morning hours. And he starts the day by saying, wake up like a lion. Get up like a lion and jump out of bed. And then he takes you through the last of the holidays. And that's how he ends that volume, that row. Then he has a row about civil law, Choshe Mishpat, an entire volume of civil law. Then he has a whole row of Even Ezer. These are laws related to marriage and divorce. And then he has a row, the 4th row is the row that relates to Yoredea. These are areas requiring rulings by a rabbi, Yoredea, to give halachic ruling. So, for example, most prominently, these are the laws of kosher and non-kosher. For example, meat and milk. What if a drop of milk falls into your chicken soup? Is it kosher or not? Or what do you do? Or how do you observe the laws of mourning? Rahmana litzlan. All of these are in Yoredea, and today that's the first basis for being a rabbi, is to be proficient in the laws of Yoredea. They assume they don't even give you rabbinic ordination in many places for the first section, the daily life. That's an assumption that every Jew has to know the answers to that. So I wanted to just share with you some of his commentary on this verse. Ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lefnehem. These are the laws that you shall place before them. So he says, Ve'ela, and what does it mean, and these? He says, this is an acronym, notarikon. It's a Greek word, means it's an acronym for V'chayev atar lachkor hadin. You are obligated to investigate the law, meaning to say that the judges have an obligation. The judges have an obligation to as also, just like it's a moral obligation for all of us to obey the civil law, so too the judges have an obligation to rule properly in each case. And then he says, the verse states, Hamishpatim. These are the Mishpatim. Now, this is something very, very interesting. There's a fundamental dispute, which we're going to see at the beginning of Sanhedrin, which he refers to here. He says, this is a notarikon, this is an acronym for Hadayan Mitzuveh Sheyaseh Pshara Terem Yaseh Mishpat. The judge or the judges are commanded to try to seek a compromise before they give a ruling. This is actually a dispute in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin 6b, whether the judges should seek a compromise or whether they should try to rule according to the clear ruling of the case. And so the Talmud discusses this. And it's according to one opinion in the Talmud, Botseya Berech Neitz Hashem. Botseya is considered a compromise, and the one who compromises is cursing, meaning to say just because it's a violation, but it's a violation of giving the true justice. If you have a compromise, then you for sure don't have justice. But halacha rules not like that. This is the Tur. The Tur is the codifier. He's the one who decided that there's a whole section of Jewish law called civil law, Choshe Mishpat, and he rules that arbitration, compromise is considered a mitzvah, that it's a meritorious action, that before the judge goes out to give a judicial ruling, the judge should encourage, wink, wink, the parties to try to find a compromise to their dispute. And this is based upon the verse from Zechariah, Emes u'mishpat shalom shiftu, truth and justice of peace you shall judge. Meaning to say, and how can this make sense? Where there is judgment, there's no really peace, because one side is wrong. And where there is peace, there's no judgment. So what does it mean, a judgment of peace? Mishpat shalom shiftu. What does it mean? It means that you have to try to seek a compromise which is acceptable to both parties and therefore makes peace. So therefore, the compromise is the preferred way. So there's a mitzvah for the judge to encourage the parties to try to compromise. And obviously, when a person goes to litigation, obviously both parties feel they're wrong. And so the Tur is siding with the approach, very, very beginning of this verse, to tell us that the Mishpatim means try to seek a compromise. 1 minute, I want to just go through his first verse, and then I'll come back and take a question. Hold on just one moment here. So the Tur then says something else that I wanted to bring out, just still on this first verse. He says, then he takes out laws. He says, Tasim, what does that mean? You shall place, Tishma shnehem yachan medabrim. Listen to them together when they speak. So that the court is not allowed to have ex parte communications. You have to hear both of them speaking together. Lifneihem, before them. So the Tur writes that this is an acronym of Lo Pnei Nadiv Yadar Hit Naker Mehem. Don't show any special favor to somebody important. Make yourself distant from them if you are the judge. And then he writes something very good. Remember, we saw Rashi says that this verse of civil law is next to the passage of the altar to tell us that they're both taught at Sinai. But he gives a different reasoning. Why? Remember, the previous passage was in the Torah is that there's an altar, and the altar cannot have steps, but it has to have a ramp going up it. So he says, Samach Mishpatim v'lo taleh b'ma'alot. He says the passage of civil law is next to the passage of you shall not make steps on the altar to tell you, Havu mitunim badin. You need to be deliberate in your decisions, meaning to say that you can't go up too quickly. Lo ya'alu ela yelchu b'mitun. You have to go deliberately. And ma'alot, steps in gematria, meaning to go up in the numerical value of going up, is steps, is mitunim, patient. You have to take these steps patiently. And then the next passage of Mishpatim is against the prohibition, Samach Mishpatim le'alei kesef, you're not going to make gods of silver, to tell you, Shelo yimaneh dayan b'shvil mamon, that a judge should not be appointed based upon monetary considerations. You shouldn't say, well, this judge, he gave a lot of money to my presidential campaign, and so therefore I'm going to make this man a judge. That's a biblical violation according to the Tur. Uksiv le'elminei, and it says prior to this is the phrase I really wanted to get to. It states, right before this, it states in the verse, Ki charbecha heinafta, because you have raised your sword over it. Shetzarach hadayan le'ros ki'ilu charev munachas lo al yirecho. When a judge sits down to make a ruling, the judge has to imagine as though a sword is placed over his thigh. Why his thigh? That's referring to the male judge. Even though there is an opinion that a female could be a judge, but most of the judges were clearly males, and he has to imagine that there's a sword placed over his thigh, meaning to say that trepidation before he gives his ruling, not, God forbid, with arrogance. So these are just some of the rulings of the Baal Haturim. It shows his power, his powerful spiritual approach. Yes, we'll take, I see a question.